The systematic killing of Hutus in the Democratic Republic of Congo between March 1993 and June 2003 remains an irrefutable crime, whose perpetrators are yet to be brought to justice. In July 1997, a joint mission was authorized by the UN High Commission on Human Rights and charged with investigating the allegations of massacres and other violations of human rights that had taken place in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo since September 1996. The mission reported to the General Assembly that there is no denying that ethnic massacres were committed and that the victims were mostly Hutus from Burundi, Rwanda, and Zaire. The Joint Mission's preliminary opinion is that some of these alleged massacres could constitute acts of genocide. However, the Joint Mission cannot issue a precise, definitive opinion on the basis of the information currently available to it. An in-depth investigation in the territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo would clarify this situation. The United Nations Secretary-General subsequently sent an investigative team charged with investigating grave violations of human rights and international humanitarian law allegedly committed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, former Zaire, since 1st of March 1993. Although limited in its mandate, the team concluded in its report that the systematic massacre of the Hutus remaining in Zaire was an abhorrent crime against humanity, but the underlying rationale for the decisions is material to whether these killings constituted genocide. That is, a decision to eliminate, in part, the Hutu ethnic group. The underlying reason for the massacres of Zairean Hutus in North Kivu is also material. This aspect is the most momentous one included in the mandate given to the team, and one which requires further investigation. In late 2005, the United Nations Organization mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUC, discovered 3 mass graves in North Kivu. This was a reminder that gross human rights violations committed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo had not been investigated, and that those responsible had not been held accountable. The UN Secretariat held a number of consultations with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, the United Nations Organization Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Department of Political Affairs, the Office of Legal Affairs, and the Office of the Secretary-General's Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. From this, an agreement was reached to provide the Congolese authorities with the tools needed to break the cycle of impunity. In 2010, a mapping exercise was conducted and published. It's considered the most serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law committed within the Democratic Republic of Congo between March 1993 and June 2003. The mapping exercise identified and described over 782 major incidents. Among these incidents were the systematic killings and massacres perpetrated against members of the Hutu ethnic group during the First Congo War that took place from July 1996 to July 1998. This war involved the Zairean Armed Forces and the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, or AFDL. The AFDL was a coalition of Rwandan, Ugandan, Burundian, and selected Congolese dissidents that toppled Mobutu Sese Seko and brought Laurent Désiré Kabila to power. In October 1996, in the Uvira territory of South Kivu, 11 refugee camps located along the Rusizi River, hosting nearly 220,000 Hutu refugees, were attacked by the Rwandan Patriotic Army, or RPA. Using heavy weapons, the RPA killed nearly 2,400 refugees. After the camps were dismantled and Uvira captured, some refugees fled towards Fizi territory, then travelled on to Tanzania or Zambia. Others tried to escape towards the north, through Kabare and Walungu territories. In Kabare and Walungu territories, there were more than 26 refugee camps, commonly known as the Bukavu camps. These held nearly 308,000 Hutu refugees. These were also attacked and dismantled in October 1996. leading to the death of over 1,865 Hutu refugees. Hutu refugees who survived the attacks on the camps from Uvira and Bukavu fled westward towards Maniema province. However, they were pursued by the AFDL and RPA soldiers. Hutu refugees were subjected to systematic attacks in each location where they were identified by the AFDL and the RPA. The massacres often began with a trick. Refugees would be invited to meetings on the pretext of discussing their repatriation to Rwanda. Those who attended the meetings were killed. The UN mapping report cites the cases in Uvira territory, where 550 Hutus were killed. Bukavu territory, where 800 were killed. And in Shabunda territory, where 180 Hutu were killed. It is estimated that more than 9,300 Hutu refugees were killed in South Kivu alone from October 1996 to March 1997. The AFDL and the RPA also attacked Hutus who had found refuge in North Kivu. There were more than 700,000 Rwandan refugees living in 5 camps located around the city of Goma. In October 1996, Kiumba and Katale camps, which hosted nearly 400,000 refugees between them, were bombarded with heavy weapons by the RPA, killing an unknown number of Hutu civilians. Some survivors headed in the direction of Masisi, while others tried to reach the Mugunga camp. Those who survived and remained in the camps were killed by the AFDL and the RPA soldiers when they finally entered the camps. Having taken control in Goma in November 1996, the AFDL and the RPA fired indiscriminately with heavy weapons in Mugunga camp, which held over 156,000 refugees, and the surrounding area, killing an unknown number of Hutu civilians. More than 5,800 Hutu refugees were killed as a result of the shelling of the refugee camps located around the city of Goma by the AFDL and the RPA. The UN Secretary-General's investigative team, which was deployed to the DRC in July 1997, made the following remarks. When the refugee camps were attacked in October and November 1996, it is clear that one of the objectives was to force the refugee population in the camps to return to Rwandan territory. To some extent, the return was voluntary. However, it is also clear that, at some times and in some areas, the attacks on former camp populations which fled westward into the interior of Zaire were not intended to force them to return, but simply to eliminate them.
Nitwa Benoit Rugumaho, ku busabe bw'umuryango wa Loni wita ku mpunzi, naje gutuzwa buhunzi muri Suwede, maze kuruka ubwicanyi bwakorewe impunzi z'abahutu mu cyahoze Zaire. Nabaga mu nkambi ya Kashusha, nkabana nabonye ukuntu iyo nkambi yahinduwe umuyonga n'amasasu n'amabomba atagira uko angana. Abashyize ku icumu twahunze twerekeza mu burengerazuba bwa Zaire, tutangira inzira ndende, turokoka bwicanyi Ihombo, Itebero, Warikare, Tingitingi, Rubutu, Ubundu, Obiro, Ikere, Bukungu, Ingende, Bowende, Wenjisekere na Bandaka. Amarira azahozwa n'ifura yanjye yapfuye igashyingurwa Obiro amaze ibyumweru 2 avukiye ku musozi wa Rubutu, igihe inkambi ya Tingitingi yahindurwaga irimbi ry'impunzi z'abahutu mu cyahoze ari Zaire. Ubuhamya bwanjye mwabusanga mu gitabo Recounts des réfugiés rwandais d'Zaire, témoignage de survivants, cyahinduwe mu Giswedwa, mu Cyongereza no mu Cyesipanyoli. Hari na filime yakozwe ihereye ku buhamya bwanjye. Abarokotse ubwicanyi muri Congo turasaba ko imyanzuro ya raporo mapping yashyirwa mu bikorwa nk'uko Dr. Mukwege abisaba.
The survivors from the refugee camp attacks fled across Masisi territory towards Walikale territory. The AFDL and the RPA soldiers pursued them and killed over 200 Hutu refugees in different makeshift camps. In the Kirumbu and Karuba camps, a group of Hutu refugees were caught on their way to a nearby United Nations transit center to be repatriated. According to witnesses, the women were raped before they were killed. From November 1996, Hutu refugees who survived the attacks in both South and North Kivu started arriving in Walikale territory. The AFDL and RPA troops also arrived in Walikale in December 1996. They held public meetings with local people in which they accused the Hutu refugees of being collectively responsible for the genocide of Tutsis in Rwanda. They called on locals to help flush them out and kill them. It is in that context that several hundred refugees, including women and children, were shot dead at the Hombo Bridge. Witnesses said that women were raped by the soldiers before they were killed, and an unknown number of Hutu refugees burned alive. Others were also executed near the village of Chambunda, in the villages of Kilambu and Busurungi, in the town of Kifuka, and in the Walikale center. The mapping exercise reported over 6,030 Hutu refugees killed in North Kivu alone.
Je m'appelle Fidel Kavera, j'ai survécu à l'hécatombe des réfugiés rwandais à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo, ex-Zaire, dont les tueries et massacres du pont de Hombo situé à l'extrémité nord du sud Kivu en début décembre 1996. Très tôt le matin, nous avons été réveillés par des bruits des armes automatiques, des roquettes et des grenades de l'armée patriotique rwandaise qui soutenait à l'époque les AFDL. Beaucoup de gens y sont morts fusillés, d'autres bâillonnés. Beaucoup d'autres sont morts noyés en essayant d'échapper au massacre en nageant. Et ceux qui ont pu s'échapper avec des blessures graves ont succombé au cours de la route. Ici, je pense à la famille Ndamagé, une famille amie qui est complètement décimée, lui-même, sa femme et ses enfants, et d'autres personnes dont je ne peux pas citer les noms publiquement pour éviter des problèmes avec les proches qui sont encore au Rwanda. Que les âmes de nôtres reposent en paix et qu'ils aient justice un jour.
From Walikale, refugees made their way through the dense forests of Congo and arrived in Maniema province in early 1997. Almost 120,000 Hutu refugees settled in the makeshift camp of Tingi Tingi. However, on 28th of February 1997, the refugees, hearing that Rwandan Patriotic Army troops were 10 kilometers from the camp, fled towards Lubutu. The next day, the RPA units entered Tingi Tingi camp and indiscriminately killed the remaining occupants. They also opened fire on escaping refugees at the rear of the column fleeing towards Lubutu as they were waiting to cross the Lubilinga River. This resulted in a stampede. Many refugees drowned in the river, and others were crushed underfoot by the crowds in the ensuing panic. Other locations where Hutu refugees were killed in Maniema province were Pangi and Kasongo, where over 200 were executed, and Kisanji, where more than 165 were killed. On 14th of March 1997, during a joint mission, UN organizations and NGOs found around 2,000 survivors of the massacres wandering around the Tingi Tingi camps. However, the AFDL and RPA deliberately blocked all humanitarian, health and medical aid destined for the survivors. This resulted in the death of more than 216 at Tingi Tingi. It is estimated that over 600 people have been killed by AFDL and RPA soldiers in Maniema province.
Yitwa Antoinette, ubwicanyi bw'impunzi bwabereye muri Zaire ndabuhamya kuko naburokotse. Sinzibagirwa ubwicanyi bwabereye i Masisi, icyo gihe ngiye nari ndwaye, ariko numvise amasasu y'inkotanyi, mbona imbaraga zo kwirukanka. Abantu barapfuye nk'uko tubibona mu mafilimi. Sinzibagirwa nanone urufaya rw'amasasu numvishe ku kiraro cya Rubutu, abantu bamwe bakijugunya mu mazi, yebawe ababyeyi bamwe bakajishura abana babo kugira ngo bashobore kubona uko birukanka. Twabonye abapfu benshi, intozi zibaca mu kanwa no mu mazuru, ariko rero nimuze tuvuge ibyatubayeho kuko natwe turi aba victime. Nitwibagirwe kandi ko muri ibyo byose twacagamo n'abazayirwa babigwagamo. Tubibuke kandi n'ubu bagipfa. Murakoze.
Fleeing from Lubutu in Maniema province, Rwandan Hutu refugees arrived in Orientale province in March 1997. However, they were attacked by the AFDL and the RPA soldiers in their makeshift camps in Ubundu territory, where over 550 refugees were killed and their bodies dumped in the Luboya River. The survivors from the Ubundu attacks split. One group headed towards Équateur province, while the other continued towards Kisangani in the hope of accessing humanitarian aid or even being repatriated to Rwanda. The latter settled in makeshift camps at Kisesar and Biaro near Kisangani at the end of March 1997. These camps hosted close to 80,000 Hutu refugees. 60 to 120 refugees died each day from disease or exhaustion in these makeshift camps. But the AFDL and the RPA troops barred aid agencies and humanitarian NGOs from delivering food and other humanitarian needs to Hutu refugees in the camps. In April 1997, the residents of Kisesar, encouraged and accompanied by the AFDL and the RPA, attacked the camps with machetes and arrows, killing an unknown number of Hutu refugees. The massacre lasted between 7 to 12 hours and took place in the presence of several senior figures from the Rwandan army. Also, the AFDL and the RPA opened fire indiscriminately on the camp of Biaro, killing 100 people. The soldiers then went in pursuit of those who had managed to escape into the forest, killing an unknown number. The bodies of the victims were transported to certain sites at night to be burned. Survivors of the attacks in the makeshift camps at Kisesar and Biaro were forced to travel on a train to the transit camp that had been set up near Kisangani airport, in conditions likely to cause considerable loss of human life. This led to the death of over 90 people. The survivors not apprehended were spread around Opala territory. In April and May 1997, around 300 were shot dead by units of the AFDL and the RPA, as well as killed with cold weapons by local residents in Opala. In May and June 1997, AFDL APR soldiers allowed a group of Hutu refugees, including women and children, to believe they were going to be taken back to Rwanda. However, according to witnesses, the soldiers allegedly killed them using cold weapons in the Benga Misa locality. They threw the victims' bodies into pits, doused them with petrol, and burned them. From June 1997, the AFDL APR units carried out similar killings around Alibuku. Hutu refugees were taken to a site twice a week and executed. Witnesses said the victims probably numbered several hundred. Overall, more than 2,200 Hutu refugees were killed throughout Orientale province. Most Hutu refugee survivors continued running for their life through the Congolese forest west of Ubundu and arrived in the Équateur province by March or April 1997. The AFDL and the RPA soldiers were right behind them. These soldiers shot and killed an unknown number of Hutu refugees at Bwende. Refugees had been waiting for a boat for Mbandaka for several weeks. Witnesses said that many refugees tried to escape by jumping into the river, but they drowned. Once Bwende was captured by the AFDL and the RPA, the refugees fled in several directions. Several headed south of Bwende, crossed the Zaire River and entered the Republic of Congo. Others fled northwards towards Mbandaka, pursued by the AFDL and the RPA soldiers. In that context, 40 refugees were killed in Zaire. 7 in Bekonji, 9 in Wele, 30 in Lolo Dike, 140 in Wenji, including a 3-month-old baby, 18 in Bolenge, and an unknown number in Mbandaka. At least 573 Hutu refugees were killed by the AFDL and the RPA soldiers in the Équateur province.
Nitwa Jacqueline Nubuhoro, nkaba nararokotse ubwicanyi bwa jenoside yagiriwe impunzi z'abahutu muri Congo ikozwe n'abasirikare ba FPR Inkotanyi. Ndabyibuka aho mu mashyamba ya Kisangani za Mbandaka abantu barishwe, imirambo iruzura, abandi barashimutwa n'abasirikare ba FPR Inkotanyi babagejeje mu Rwanda nabo barabica. Hari harimo benshi rwose bo mu muryango wanjye. Njye nararokotse kubera abagira neza b'abanyekongo bamishe. Kugeza ubu ndabashimira aho bari hose.
The massacres in Mbandaka, committed in May 1997, was the final stage in the hunt of Hutu refugees that had begun in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in October 1996. The mapping exercise report also described extensively the attacks against victims other than Hutu refugees. These were also carried out during the First Congo War between the Zairean armed forces and the AFDL from July 1996 to July 1998. These attacks were against Tutsi and Banyamulenge civilians and other civilian populations. A key finding of the mapping report was that the systematic attacks, in particular killings and massacres perpetrated against members of the Hutu ethnic group, resulted in a very large number of victims, probably tens of thousands of members of the Hutu ethnic group, all nationalities combined. In the vast majority of cases reported, it was not a question of people killed unintentionally in the course of combat, but people targeted primarily by the AFDL, APR, and FAB forces, and executed in their hundreds, often with edged weapons. The majority of the victims were children, women, elderly people, and the sick, who posed no threat to the attacking forces. The report also said that the apparently systematic and widespread nature of the attacks, which targeted very large numbers of Rwandan Hutu refugees and members of the Hutu civilian population, resulting in their death, reveal a number of damning elements that, if they were proven before a competent court, could be classified as crimes of genocide. The mapping report concluded that, in light of the impunity enjoyed by the perpetrators of serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, and the repetition of crimes within the territory of the DRC, there is a manifest urgency for justice and security service reform. The members of the mapping team were able to observe the constant fear on the part of affected populations that history would repeat itself, especially when yesterday's attackers are returning in positions that enable them to commit new crimes with complete impunity.